Hello there, and welcome to a review. We're actually doing another one of these of a game that is very much considered an absolute classic. Scratch that. It's an adaptation of an absolute classic. Essentially, Cosmic Encounter Duel is a two-player adaptation of Cosmic Encounter, which has been around since the 70s. It's an old game that's really stood the test of time, and although things have kind of changed a little and adapted over time, it's still very much one of the most popular games out there. But it's very much a group game of forming alliances and breaking them at the opportune time. So how does that figure in a two-player game where the only other person playing the game is the person sitting opposite you? It obviously is going to need some changes made to it, but let's have a look at whether this game can capture all the chaos and random excitement that the first game captured so brilliantly, like a honey badger covered in jam running through a very public area. Let's have a look at how this one plays. Okay, so I'm going to start off by explaining some of the similarities between the two games. I'm going to assume that you may already know most of the original game, but I'll give a little rundown of a few of the basics that appear in both games. Each player has a finite number of these incredibly cool little UFO pieces that stack nicely into a pile. You're going to be wagering a number of those on each individual conflict. Basically, your UFOs represent your army's force. After that, should you have any remaining UFOs, and this is a slight difference here, you then have a hand of cards here. They are all going to have a number on. This is kind of like a negotiation phase almost, and what's going to happen is you're going to play a card each face down. You're then going to reveal them, and you're going to compare the amounts. Whoever has the highest amount plus the ship advantage, should you have more UFOs than your opponent left, they get added together. Whoever has the highest score wins. However, this can be adjusted. You see, there are these reinforcement cards, which the backs look exactly the same as these cards, so that your opponent doesn't know when you have a reinforcement card and when you don't. You get these at various points over the course of the game, and they can add extra numbers, and basically you go backwards and forwards until both players pass on the opportunity to play reinforcements cards. And then, simply put, whoever has the most influence at the end of that claims the planet for themselves, and in this version of the game, it's whoever gets to 5 planets first is the winner, which is a little bit different to the original Cosmic Encounter, when it's the first person to settle 5 opponents' planets wins the game. So there's this kind of similarity there, but it is also slightly different. So the first real major difference you're going to find in Cosmic Encounter Duel is that you're lacking that player negotiation that you usually have in a game of Cosmic Encounter. Usually at the point where you go to send UFOs to a planet, you usually offer everyone else around the table the opportunity to either attack with you or help your opponent defend the planet. There can be various negotiations there of, I will give you a card from my hand and things like that. It's actually a really, really big part of the original Cosmic Encounter game, because these alliances, and when they're broken, is usually one of the most fun parts of the game. But it's not here. So what have they done to kind of fill that void? Okay, so the way they've kind of dealt with this here is at the beginning of the game, you draw 3 cards, which all have different backings to them. So there are 3 different types of backing. Each one of these has their own pile, basically, and you draw 1 from each pile at random. So 1 from this pile, 1 from this pile, and 1 from this pile. They will be placed face down and will remain hidden. Now, over the course of the game, what will happen is, usually it's when someone loses, although in some cases it will be rewarded to the winner, the player gets the opportunity to move one of these cards. The idea being that if they are closer to one player, assuming you're sitting opposite, you currently have an alliance with that race. Again, you don't know what race it is when you initially move them towards you. But once they're on your side, you can flip them over, have a look, see exactly which alien race it is, and you can read their ability. And they do not have to tell their opponent what the ability is. They will then get the opportunity to use that at the time it states on the card. So this is kind of an interesting way of moving around the negotiations, however still having something where if you've improved relations with other people you may have an alliance. However, these alliances can change as well over time. So in other words, usually a player will get the option to move one of them either back into the middle or over to their side. So it's considered that you're kind of sitting on a grid. There's one space near you, one space in the middle, and one space on your opponent's side, and you'll be having a tug of war between these three different factions. It's very possible you could have all three factions on your side and offer you a whole heap of interesting powers to use over the course of the game, which is really, really cool. So there's a couple of other new elements to this game, and one of them is the use of these tactics. Each player is going to have 5 of these in front of them during the game, and they will kind of act as a shield. They all have abilities on the other side, and obviously your opponent isn't going to know which ones are available to you and which ones aren't at the beginning of the game. They each have 2 sides. So for example, with this one here, you have 2 attack or 2 defense. On the other ones, you have them numbered 1 to 4. There is then one other one, which is this curious one here. Should you select to use your tactic as the bottom 1 symbol, you get to take one of your used tactics back into your tactics pile. If you choose the other side, you get to take 2 back, whereas your opponent gets to take 1 back. So when do you use these? Well, remember I said that you bet a number of UFOs at the beginning? You actually bet using one of these neat little dials here, which Fantasy Flight seem to be so enamored with these days. So you secretly choose a number on here, and then you both reveal at the same time. You can pick between 1 and 4 ships to send for each planet that you draw. Now, then you get to pick one of these tactics. So let's say I pick this one here, and I choose it on this side. It's the bottom of the stand that actually determines what you're actually choosing there. You then flip it over to reveal. I've chosen 2 defense, so that means I'll absorb 2 damage from whatever my opponent sends at me. If I was to choose the attack, they have to reduce their ships by the number there. Should both players pick defense, then no damage is dealt at all, and you've both kind of outplayed one another. You've kind of both played into one another, assuming that each other was going to attack. Should you attack, you get to remove any number of UFOs between 1 and that number. In fact, you get to remove however many you've actually picked from that tactic. And the opponent can reduce the damage by playing defense sides. Now, it's kind of a neat little paper, scissors, stone standoff, because, like I said, the negotiation phase of the original Cosmic Encounter is such a big part. They've had to find other systems to add in here in order to make the game a little bit more interesting. And you know what? This actually really works. It actually allows you to have a certain amount of deduction as to what your opponent has already used, what they don't currently have in your pile, how many UFOs you're going to send in your next turn. So really, more so than the original Cosmic Encounter, there's actually a fairly big deal of strategy to this game, which is a neat little distraction. So much like the original Cosmic Encounter, you do still have your own alien race, and this is usually where the real fun comes in. Unlike the original Cosmic Encounter though, your ability is always active. In the original, it tended to be that you had a very specific time that your power would launch. Sometimes you get to choose when you use it, sometimes they trigger when a certain thing happens in the game. So in this one, like I say, your ability is always active, but they are also terribly unbalanced. just like in Cosmic Encounter. This is not a bad thing. This is kind of what's fun about the game. It's the idea that someone could have a ridiculous power that when they use, you go, wait, what? You're doing what now? That's a really fun part of this game. It's got a real kind of take that kind of element to it that's really, really cool. Okay, so any of you that haven't played the original Cosmic Encounter may actually be a little bit lost at this point. So I'm going to explain how exactly this version of the game flows. So you'll actually start off, you have 3 decks on the board. You have a locations deck, you have an event deck, and you have a resource deck. Now, the very first thing you're going to do on your turn is you are going to draw from the location deck. And the location will almost always say, discover a new planet, and then have a duel there. What you're going to do is take one planet from your planet deck, and you're going to flip it over, and you're going to have a duel there. This is where the whole process starts taking place, with choosing your UFOs first, using your dial, revealing them at the same time, and placing your number of UFOs on the planet. Then you'll have your negotiation phase, where each of you play a card from your hand, and then you get to adjust that number with your reinforcements cards. Now, this is where the game really gets wonderfully chaotic, because you see, after you have had your encounter on the planet and that's all settled, you actually have, first of all, you have the ship advantage, which is written there. This basically means whoever has the most UFOs on that planet at that time get to have an additional number added to the card that they've drawn. So you do want to have the most UFOs on the planet normally. Then, underneath that, it actually says what either the loser or the winner gets. These can range from being able to take ships back from the void, a place where your ships go where you cannot take them back unless you're instructed to, or it could be something like draw a reinforcements card or something like that. So generally that's how you get hold of them. So it actually adds this kind of neat little thing where sometimes you may not actually want to win the planet because perhaps you're comfortable and you just want to gain a few more resources before the next time, because it says the loser gets to take more ships back. And if at any point in the game you run out of ships and cannot play them, you lose the game. So your ships are a vital resource. Now, here's the next bit. It tells you at the bottom which sort of card to draw next. This particular one is really not a good example. I probably should have rigged this. So let's draw another one of these. Here we go. It says at the bottom there, the next one you draw is a event card. So you've had your encounter, you've done all that, you've decided who's just won the planet, you've given the rewards away. Now you draw your next card and you see what happens. Event cards can be almost anything. It just throws a random swerve your way. Sometimes it could say, have a duel on a previously won planet. So just because you've won a duel on a planet doesn't necessarily mean you've definitely got ownership of that for the rest of the game. It could be other things as well. For example, this one here is social unrest. Use the planet bar to select a planet and have a duel there. So you'll notice that every planet has a little symbol on the bottom of it there. And that symbol is then matched up to this chart here. So basically then it says each player who controls the planet cannot send ships, but you have to have a duel there either way. So in other words, if you've got ships on that planet, you don't get to send any more. However, if your opponent doesn't have any ships on there, which they shouldn't have really, they get to send ships. You see, at the end of a duel, whoever wins the planet, the opponent gets to withdraw their ships. So they actually can almost have a ship advantage later on. It's kind of a good way of keeping this game kind of balanced out a little bit. Your last one, the resource types card, if you're ever told to draw one of them, it usually has a chart with a number of coloured symbols. If you have UFOs currently on a planet with that symbol on, you can take the relative resource that's actually on the card. There's usually an option as well that says you can also take this option should you not have any ships currently available on a planet, although I think you can take it optionally anyway, so that's not too much of a big deal. So really, that's the game, and like I said before, the player that wins the game is usually the player that actually has UFOs on their 5th planet. There are game-altering effects in this that can change that, and like I say, if you run out of UFOs at any point, you also lose the game. But that, in a nutshell, is Cosmic Encounter. So really, that is Cosmic Encounter Duel in a nutshell. It's interesting because this game is actually very different to the original Cosmic Encounter. However, what they have changed is actually very, very clever. Like I say, the original is a game based on negotiation between players and laughing at one another when the various take that effects happen. But this is a far more strategical game. However, it still somehow manages to maintain all of that chaos, which is a marvellous achievement. The systems that are gone have pretty much made the game completely separate to Cosmic Encounter. But the essence of Cosmic Encounter is still here. The whole thing of, if something happens, sometimes it's not your fault that you've lost. Simply, things just haven't gone your way. For example, it was a point when me and Daryl were playing this, where you had a card that was drawn that said, if a player would win on this turn, they lose. So all of a sudden, I was desperately trying to lose, and Daryl was desperately trying to lose, because if he'd won that encounter on that planet, then the game would have been up, and I would have won, despite the fact that I think I was 2 planets behind him at the time. It's really done a wonderful job as well of the systems that they've added in actually really work. There's still a lot of randomness to this game, and that has to be accepted when you play this. If you're someone that likes a stone cold winner because they have been the strategically dominant player, then you're not going to find this here. Something else that's worth noting as well is that UFO management actually seems to be far more important in this game. In the original Cosmic Encounter, you could run out of UFOs and you could be in big, big trouble. However, you could still keep playing the game. It kind of is a little bad when you're playing a game and someone gets knocked out very, very early and can't play the game anymore. That's not so much the problem here. But it's not just running out of UFOs entirely. Having less than 4 UFOs is generally very bad, because the other player, on realizing this, can just disable you with proper use of their tactics. They can basically close out the game at that point and really push you into a corner. So that's a really nice element to this game too. Now, I have to be kind of careful here, because I've already said that this game is actually quite different to the original Cosmic Encounter. However, I do think that if you love the original Cosmic Encounter and you're looking for a 2-player game that kind of captures at least the spirit of it, this is probably going to be for you. It's, despite the fact that, like I said, it's a more strategic game where you can kind of work out what resources the other person has got and exploit that, which doesn't really happen in the original Cosmic Encounter. It's more, that one is more about trying to sway the table to do what you want, forming alliances and then breaking them at the optimal time. Like I said, this does not really have that, because it's only a 2-player game. That would be impossible. But the spirit of Cosmic Encounter is here. The idea that a certain degree of wackiness could happen at one time and completely switch the entire state of the game in another player's favour is definitely here, just like it is in Cosmic Encounter, with the various alien powers getting triggered at specific times and things like that. What Fantasy Flight have done is really remarkable, because it goes to show that you don't need to just take a carbon copy of a game that's already popular and scale it down into a 2-player version of the game. You can actually mess with those systems a fair bit and still come out with something that's incredibly wacky and incredibly fun. Now, That said, this does also work the other way as well. I think if you didn't enjoy Cosmic Encounter, if you did find that the randomness and the fact that you can play a perfect game and still lose bothers you, you're going to have the same problem with this one. So I'm not going to say this game is absolutely going to change your mind on it. In fact, I think it's really unlikely that it will do. However, I absolutely love this game. I've played it several times now and enjoyed every single game of it, despite the fact that sometimes you can play a game, feel like you're doing great, and then suddenly have the tides turned and lose because of a random event happening. It's kind of just funny in this, and I think that only works if you go into the game accepting it, that it could happen before it actually does. Honestly, I really think this is worth a shot, especially if you did originally like Cosmic Encounter. In fact, I think if you like Cosmic Encounter and are looking to play 2 players, this should already be in your collection. On that, I would like to thank you guys for watching this review video. We are slowly catching up with our reviews due to the thing that's going on at the moment with viruses spreading across the world and being unable to play games. We're slowly getting through that review list that we have promised you guys. They will make their way out eventually. We may be at a stopping point here. We haven't played any games for a little while again now. But hopefully soon we'll get back on the review train and be able to do a few more of these. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please go and look up our social media accounts so you can keep up to date with everything we're doing. You can find us on Twitter at EverybodyDice and on Instagram at EverybodyDice. We also have a Facebook page over at facebook.com/EverybodyDice. If you really enjoy what we do and want to help support us and maybe throw a couple of bucks our way in order to help keep these reviews going, we have a Patreon page. You can find it at patreon.com/EverybodyDice, where for as little as $1 a month, you pretty much get access to everything that we basically have to offer. We have the viewers poll as to what we actually review each month. We put up a selection of games that have been released recently, and you guys get to choose which one we actually review. You also get to do the same thing for our podcast as well. We put 3 topics up every 2 weeks, and they get to decide exactly what we're going to review. Apart from that, please give this a like, a share, subscribe if you haven't already, and please do leave comments too. This all really helps us and helps the channel grow. Apart from that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this time. Maybe click one of the videos that should be this side here right now and check out more of what we do. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next time.